Miep Geist, or Germaine Geist Sanchowitz, lived from February 15, 1909 to January 11, 2010, 100 years. She was born in Vienna, Austria. Before the war, Miep worked for the Franks in Otto Frank's company, Opekta, in the Netherlands. During this time, she married her husband, Jan. During the war, she hid Jewish refugees, including the family of Anne Frank and 4 other Dutch Jews in her office annex above Otto Frank's business. To feed the refugees, Miep brought food and also library books to keep them occupied. In Anne Frank's diary, Anne says that Miep packs like a mule. She fetches and carries so much. Almost every day, she manages to get hold of some vegetables for us and brings everything in shopping bags on her bicycle. Miep kept the refugees hidden for 761 days until someone turned them in. They were raided by Nazis, and 2 of their helpers and all of those in hiding were arrested. After the arrest, Miep found their belongings and kept Anne's notebooks and papers safe in hopes to return them to her. In June of 1945, Otto showed up on her doorstep and stayed with her and her family for 7 years. It became clear that Anne and her family were killed while at Bergen-Belsen, so Miep gave the diaries to Otto. On March 8, 1972, Yad Vashem recognized Miep and her husband, Jan, as righteous among the nations.
From July to September, 250,000 Jews from the ghetto were deported or killed. The Zab called for resistance. At the next deportation, January 18 to 21, 1943, Jews hid and resisted. Increased by these results, a full-scale result was paired. Only started on the eve of Passover, April 19, 1943. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising began, a combo of 2 resistance groups. They worked together to fight back as the German troops tried to deport the remaining inhabitants. The Jewish Military Union, ZZW, and the Jewish Combat Organization, ZOB, were the 2 groups who fought against the Nazis. The ZOB was commanded by 23-year-old Mordechai Anowitz. 750 fighters fought the German military. They held them off for nearly a month, but eventually the revolt was crushed and ended on May 16, 1943. Some of the resistant fighters managed to succeed in escaping from the ghetto and joined resistant groups in the forest around Warsaw.
The Roma were one of the groups the Nazis targeted. Considered racially inferior, Roma were placed in concentration camps not unlike those that Jews were put in. In May 1944, Roma refused the orders of SS men to leave their barracks at the Auschwitz gypsy camp because it was assumed they would be sent to the gas chambers. Efforts to force the Roma to leave faltered as they resisted with knives and axes, causing the SS men to retreat. Before this act of resistance, the Reich Interior Ministry mandated the fingerprinting and photographing of the Roma. Only a year after these guidelines were issued, the Nazis began to use them to imprison Roma in concentration camps. All of this was done in response to the perceived threat of Roma hurting German racial purity. Despite the discrimination faced by the Roma, they still resisted.
Germaine, Belinne, and Liliane Gaffney were a mother-daughter pair that helped approximately 30 of their Jewish friends escape detection from the middle to the end of the war. They had grown close to their Jewish neighbors, and when they heard that they might be arrested, instead of doing nothing, they provided home and identity papers to the family. Then, the neighbor's niece, Tova, came to Belgium from Poland. She also stayed with Germaine and Liliane, as she knew no French or Flemish. When people came over, Tova had to pretend she was a deaf mute. Once, just after the war, a Jewish boy said to Germaine, "You know, you were stupid. You could have been a millionaire." Germaine said she could have never done it for money. Both Germaine and Liliane were willing to risk their lives to save Jews. Because of that, about 30 people were saved from the Nazis. They were recognized as righteous Gentiles by Yad Vashem and have been honored for their resistance at the Garden of the Righteous program established by Rabbi Wahlberg in Washington, D.C.
Untitled Chapter was an underground secret archive. The resistance group documented the life and death in the Warsaw Ghetto. Untitled Chapter means joy of the Sabbath. Ringelblum was the historian who founded the group. He recruited other key figures to help, including Rabbi Shimon Habarban, Hirsch Wasser, Eliyahu Gutkeski, and Rachel Arkbach. The group was founded in October 1939. They conducted interviews, collected documents, photos, and last wills and testaments from the Capesto inhabitants. Documents were hidden in milk jugs, food cans, and metal boxes. They had to avoid Gupesco agents or face harsh punishment for this work. They held their secret meetings on the Sabbath to avoid detection. They buried their archives in 3 parts. Sadly, only 3 of the 34-plus members survived. The rest were deported, executed, or died of illnesses, including Ringelblum and his family, who escaped the ghetto but were turned in by an informant and were found and murdered. After the war, Hirsch Wasser and Rachel Arkbach led the members of the Jewish Historical Commission to recover the archive. The first cache was recovered on September 18, 1946, and 4 years later, on December 1st, 1950, the second one was found. The third was never recovered, but people suspect it is still buried under the Chinese embassy in Warsaw.
One way of showing resistance during the Holocaust was the children going to school in the ghettos. Students hid their books under their clothes. Regular schooling was banned, but in some ghettos, there were secret schools disguised as soup kitchens or other social institutions. Most children could not attend schools because they were forced to work in factories or workshops. Jews smuggled books and manuscripts into many ghettos for safekeeping and opened underground libraries in numerous ghettos. We listened to the story of Holocaust survivor Charlene Schiff. Her parents were active in community life and leaders of the local Jewish community. Her mother, Fruma Lieberman Perlmutter, and other women started a school in the Harachel ghetto for the children who were too young to work. Unfortunately, they ran out of money to barter for supplies. Charlene survived the Holocaust, but her family did not.
The Armée Juive was a French Jewish partisan group. The secret group was founded in 1942 and made up of members of Zionist youth movements. Its founders were Abraham Polonsky and Lucien Lubin. They recruited their members secretly and had to swear their loyalty to the group and the Zionist flag. Its members smuggled money from Switzerland into France to assist Jews in hiding and smuggled at least 500 Jews and non-Jews into Spain. They also took part in armed resistance. They derailed a deportation train in April 1943, burned files from an anti-Jewish organization, and took part in the 1944 uprisings against the Germans. In various parts of France, some soldiers were captured and deported to Buchenwald.
The White Rose was a resistance group that formed in 1942. The founders were university students Hans and Sophie Scholl, Alexander Schmorl, Willy Graf, and Christoph Probst. They were the only group in Germany that openly opposed Hitler's dictatorship. They mailed anti-Nazi leaflets and posted wall slogans to urge people in Germany to resist. The group wrote in their first leaflets, "Nothing is so unworthy of a civilized people as allowing itself to be governed without opposition by an irresponsible clique that has yielded to base instinct." Their second leaflet rebuked Germans for tolerating the persecution of Jews. Sophie, Hans, and Christoph were caught distributing leaflets at Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich. They were arrested on February 18, 1943, sentenced to death, and killed by the guillotine 4 days later on February 22nd. The rest of the members were eventually caught and killed as well.
Marcel Marceau was a famous Jewish French mime who played a big role in the French resistance during World War II. He was born as Marcel Mangel to Jewish immigrant parents by the names of Charles Mangel and Anne Wurzburg in 1923. His father was a kosher butcher who was later sent to Auschwitz and killed. This left deep emotional scars on Marcel. A short time later, he was recruited by his cousin, Georges Loinger, to help aid orphans out of France through the Swiss border. He used his acting skills to teach the kids to mime. He saved at least 70 children with his talents. Before the war began, he already was in contact with the children due to the fact that he continuously performed for them in the orphanages, thus made the children extremely comfortable with Marcel. When the time came to flee, they willingly traveled with Marcel and felt a mutual connection with him. The children assumed that he mimed to keep them entertained and at ease, but the reality was he mimed to keep them quiet. He mimed for his life. After World War II, he went on to study at Sarah Bernhardt Theater in Paris under the name Marcel Marceau and continued to grow into his mime act. He became a world-famous character by the name of Bip. He never acknowledged his heroism and only claimed it as the right thing to do. For this, he is mostly known for his incredible acting, but behind his good acts is a good character and a good person. I cried for my father, but I also cried for millions of people who died. Destiny permitted me to live. This is why I have to bring hope to people who struggle in the world. Marcel Marceau.
The Belsky brothers. The three Belsky brothers were Tuvia, Alexander, also known as Zeus, and Asil. They were 3 of 12 children. They were born in Stankovic, Poland, now known as Belarus. The Belsky family was one of the only Jewish families in their small community. Because of this, they had to learn how to look out for themselves due to the rapid growth of the anti-Semitism around them. These 3 brothers witnessed their parents and their 2 youngest siblings being sent away with the Nazis to their death. Instead of letting this defeat them, the 3 brothers used this horrific event to motivate their plans of survival against the odds. The brothers fled into a nearby forest after their family members, including their parents, had been killed in the ghetto on the 8th of December in 1941. They formed the nucleus of a partisan combat unit in the spring of 1942. The unit was called the Belsky Partisans. The original unit had 40 members but was quickly growing. They lived in underground bunkers. The main concern of the group was survival, though they did conduct things such as raids. Tuvia said, "I would rather save one old Jewish woman than kill 10 German soldiers." Tuvia, Zeus, and Asil sought refuge in the woods, finding homes for some of their siblings and other surviving family members among neighbors. The brothers helped save hundreds of Jews from the Nazis. The Belsky brothers undertook one of the largest, most impressive rescue operations of Jews during World War II, and until recently the extent of their heroism was unknown. In 1945, after the war, Tuvia and Zeus Belsky immigrated with their families to Palestine. Both of them fought in the Israeli armed forces during the 1948 war that established the State of Israel. They then immigrated to the United States. Asil was drafted into the Soviet Army. Though all the brothers have passed, their legacy is still among us. Numerous books and even a movie have been made to share the story of the brave Belsky brothers. They showed the world the power of defiance. Our revenge is to live. We may be hunted like animals, but we will not become animals. We have all chosen this, to live free like human beings for as long as we can. Each day of freedom is a victory, and if we died trying to live, at least we will die like human beings. Tuvia Belsky. Defiance shows us that anywhere you can lend a hand and help someone or do the right thing, your good deed will not go unnoticed.
Dietrich Bonhoeffer was an important part of the Jewish resistance during the Holocaust. He started his involvement in the resistance 2 days after Hitler was elected as the Chancellor of Germany on February 1st. He released a radio statement which said that Germany was becoming an idolatrous cult for the Führer. He continued his involvement in the resistance until April 9th when he was executed. He did multiple things to resist the Holocaust and the Nazi Party. These things include releasing a radio statement, as shown before. He was also given the opportunity to have a parish post in eastern Berlin in autumn 1933. He declined the protest of the Nazi Party, and instead accepted a role of a pastor of 2 Protestant churches in London. He also advised people to oppose the movement, attempting to assimilate the Christian gospel with Nazi ideas. When Bishop Theodor Heckel, who was the official in charge of the German Lutheran churches of foreign affairs, traveled to London to advise Bonhoeffer to abstain from any non-denominational activity that was not authorized by Berlin, Bonhoeffer refused to abide by his warnings. In 1935, Bonhoeffer instead decided to return to Germany, where he trained pastors. Bonhoeffer's ability to teach at the University of Berlin was taken after he was called a pacifist and enemy of the state by Theodor Heckel. Bonhoeffer's efforts for underground seminaries included gaining funds. He also traveled secretly between two German villages so he could conduct seminaries. He also made official contact for the first time with members of the German resistance when his brother-in-law introduced him to an organization seeking the overthrow of Hitler via a German military intelligence service called the Abwehr. He also served as a courier for the German resistance movement to reveal its intentions and existence to the Western Allied groups in hopes of gathering support and secure peace terms with the Allies for a post-Hitler government. Even in prison, he continued his work to spread religion between prisoners and guards. Dietrich Bonhoeffer did perish during the war. He was sentenced to death on the 8th of April 1945 by Judge Otto Thorbeck without witnesses, records, or a defense. He was executed on April 9th, 1945. He was executed with 6 other people in Flossenburg concentration camp. Those people included Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, General Hans Oster, the deputy of Canaris, General Karl Sack, Theodor Strunk, and Ludwig Gehr. His brother, Klaus Bonhoeffer, and brother-in-law, Rudiger Schleicher, were both executed in Berlin on April 22nd to 23rd when Soviet troops were fighting in the capital. His other brother-in-law, Hans von Doniani, had already been executed in the Sachsenhausen concentration camp on April 9th. His actions during the war was an act of resistance because he spread hope and resistance across numerous people and groups. This was an act of resistance because it's helped other people fight back against the Nazi rule. He also spread anti-Nazi messages. Not only this, but he declined any advances or opportunities offered to him that may help the Nazi Party. One thing that stood out in my research was how persistent Dietrich Bonhoeffer was. He continued to spread hope, religion, and nonviolence even when confronted and opposed by the Nazi Party and others. He spread this to many people even when he himself was in a bad situation. Even when in prison, he continued to hold his head high and spread positivity and light. This is surprising because it can be very hard to stay resilient in difficult situations, and he maintained that all throughout his resistance.
Elise Kahn Jager, Netherlands. When Germany occupied the Netherlands, a young Elise Kahn Jager went into hiding with Molly von Heel, a non-Jewish friend of her mother's, and Molly's husband Jerry. Though Elise once walked in on Jerry while he was forcing identification cards, it wasn't until decades later that Elise learned the full story behind the von Heels' effort to rescue countless Jews. A bit of background. Elise Kahn Jager was one of 4 Jewish children living in the Netherlands when the Nazis invaded. Elise's mother, friend Molly, told Elise's mom that they are Jewish and need to go into hiding and that it is dangerous for them to be out. Elise's mother did not want to do this. A little while later, Molly came back and said, "You need to think of your children. It is too dangerous to have them out in the open. Please hide them." Elise's mother finally agreed and sent her children to different rescuers. Elise and her sister was sent to her mother's friend Molly von Heel and her husband Jerry to stay with them. My story. I was sent to stay with my mother's friend Molly to avoid being taken by the Nazis. Molly's husband Jerry did not want to start a group to help save the Jews. He was only willing to have Elise and her sister. But once Molly's brother got caught saving Jews, he was sent to prison and killed. This changed Jerry's mind, and they continued the group that Molly's brother led. They stole the items to make fake IDs and gave them to people. So in the home they lived in, they created fake IDs for Jewish people, which was rare. Elise explained that Mr. and Mrs. Heel stole identifications and also had remainders from when Molly's brother did this. My life after the Holocaust. Elise Kahn Jager has donated a number of things to the Holocaust Museum. She gave the ink and stamps they used to forge the identification papers. She also gave this book that the Nazis kept for identification numbers that were forged. Jerry von Heel Cliff Jerry Von Heel's Cliff Notes were also donated. He wrote the numbers not to use on the papers and different keynotes for the identification papers they made. Elise has also told her story to many people so that everyone would understand what happened during that time and her story.
Hannah Senesh, also known as Chana Senesh, was a Jewish poet and resistance fighter during World War II. She was born on July 17, 1921, in Budapest, Hungary, to a Jewish family. Her father was a journalist and playwright, and her mother was a teacher. In 1939, she immigrated to Palestine, where she studied in an agricultural school and later at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. In 1943, she joined the British Army as a volunteer, and in 1944, she was sent on a mission to help rescue Jews in Hungary. On March 14, 1944, she parachuted into Yugoslavia and made her way to Hungary, where she joined a Jewish resistance group called HaShoah and worked as a radio operator and liaison between the group and the British Army. She was arrested by the Hungarian police on June 7, 1944, and imprisoned and tortured for several months. Despite the torture, she did not reveal any information about her mission or the resistance group. On November 7, 1944, she was executed by firing squad at the age of 23. Her legacy has lived on through her poetry. She is remembered as a symbol of Jewish resistance and courage during the Holocaust. Her most famous poem is Eli, Eli.
Clara Sever was born in Slovakia in 1935. At the start of the war, Clara and her family were sent to a concentration camp in Zelina. Clara's father was able to send a secret note to his brother, living in Banska Bystrica, asking for help. The brother persuaded a local office to vouch for the family, ensuring their release. If needed, the official would turn the family back over to the Nazis. The priests in town where they were living did not like the Nazis and what they were doing. Townspeople worked with the Jews in town to create underground bunkers below the railroad tracks near town. When the Germans were getting close to the town, the villagers helped hide the Jews under the tracks. When Nazi trains would stop to hunt Jews in the forest, the dogs that they used would get excited right where the train had stopped. The Nazis assumed that the Jews had been there and had fled to the forest, so they took their hunt elsewhere. This indigenous architecture helped keep Clara and her family safe for a long time. After the war, Clara and her family moved to Lucinek to search for the rest of her family, but they only reunited with 2 uncles. In 1951, Clara had attended the Academy of Fine Arts and Design in Bratislava. Clara had eventually immigrated to the United States, where she had a successful career as an artist. Clara passed away in 2021.
Kurt Gerstein was born in 1905 and died in 1995. Gerstein was known for being a Nazi SS officer. In 1933 is when he joined the Nazi Party, but later on Kurt ended up getting arrested due to speaking out against them and because of his religion. In 1941, Gerstein wanted to learn more about the Nazis' horrifying activities. In order to do so, he had to become one, which later led to him being assigned a job by the hygiene institution to purify the drinking water for the Nazis. This allowed him to get more insight into their environment. Kurt ended up receiving many promotions and later became the first lieutenant. He was soon given the opportunity to transport the toxic gases to the different death camps. Gerstein saw this as an opportunity to stop the murders, but Kurt informed the Swedish and Swiss legislations about the Nazis' plans. And while doing this, he ended up successfully destroying 2 loads of toxic gas while in transportation. Eventually, when the war had broken out, he ended up turning himself into the French authorities, and they later came up with an agreement that Kurt would help give the French information on what the Nazis were planning.